found the freedom in every human being. I am the most basic human right. I am a feeling you never give up in all your life. But people do this to one another. And some people rise to break all chains and destroy all walls. One such person, he cries out loud and clear that all human beings are equal, that each one of us is free. He roars, even if it means his own life. Do you know Mandela? I do. I am the feeling of freedom inside Mandela. I am like a volcano. I know the value of a person who emerges at a time when it is unthinkable to resist injustice, ready to pay the price. Mandela was a spark in the darkness of captivity, and one day he managed to bring light into dark cells. His struggle for equality and freedom dragged him into courts and then into prisons.
My name is Nelson Mandela. I am the first accused. I am not reckless, nor a lover of violence. Our fight is against real and not imaginary hardships, or to use the language of the state prosecutor, or so-called hardship. Basically, we fight against two features which are the hallmarks of African life in South Africa, and which are entrenched by the legislation which we seek to have repealed. These features are poverty and lack of human dignity. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an idea which I am prepared to die.
I have reached my verdict. The accused are all found guilty as charged. The accused have made high moral claims for their actions. In essence, they have courted martyrdom at the hands of those they call their oppressors. But I will not give them that satisfaction. Let us show the world that we are a nation of laws, and where possible, we temper justice with mercy. I have, therefore, decided not to impose the supreme penalty. The sentence in the case of all the accused will be life imprisonment.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a new Affinity webinar episode in recognition of Nelson Mandela International Day. We've just watched a short snippet from the International Festival of Language and Culture, carried out in 2018 at the Sydney International Convention Centre, organised by Affinity and Amity College. The IFLC is an annual celebration that embodies the diversity of linguistic talents from across the globe, with the sole vision of uniting nations of the world through universal human values. As reflected in that performance tonight, we're gathered to honour one of the most extraordinary human beings in history, Nelson Mandela. In significance of today, we're collaborating with distinguished institutions from South Africa, the Nelson Mandela Foundation and Turquoise Harmony Institute, as well as the Sydney Peace Foundation. I would like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that I am on Bidjigal land today, that of the Bidjigal people, and I would also like to acknowledge that wherever we are in Australia today, that we are on Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander lands. I pay my respects to our elders past and present and all the descendants who have cared for this place since creation. We also honour all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. My name is Philippa McDermott, and my traditional country is not that of the Bidjigal where I am today, but of the Mulunjali people. It's my grandfather's country from Tweed Heads to Bow Desert in Queensland, and my grandmother's people, the Waka Waka people of central Queensland. So, of course, I acknowledge my elders there as well. During this webinar, we will hear from Salo Hatang, the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and Emeritus Professor Stuart Rees, AM, founder of the Sydney Peace Foundation and co-founder of the University of Sydney's Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies. And we will also be talking to John Cleary at the end for some thoughts. The inimitable Nelson Mandela left a legacy of principles and visions that are more necessary today than when he gave brave leadership to all citizens of South Africa. He was a courteous and generous individual who carried no bitterness, not even to those who had imprisoned him for 27 years. His courage showed in refusal to compromise when faced with injustice. His vision of a non-racial South Africa was displayed in his embrace of the people of all nations, colours and creeds, and by his skills in negotiating peace with justice. He believed that interdependence meant learning about living together. Perceived as an international citizen, or he was an international citizen, he was supported in the worldwide chorus Free Nelson Mandela. And today's webinar provides a chance to recall his life's work and to remain dedicated to live by his principles and to learn so much from him. So I would like to welcome Salo and Stuart. And of course, today, more than ever, I think we need to embrace his principles. So without further ado, I would ask Selo, and thank you for joining us from South Africa, to begin today by telling us what is happening over there in South Africa. We watch here with dismay and, you know, with our hearts breaking to see what is happening there. So if you wouldn't mind giving us an update about, you know, what is happening.
Thank you very much, Philippa, and thanks, Prof. Riz, for joining us. And it's an absolute honor for me to be here. I think it's important that as we reflect on what's happening in South Africa at the moment, we remind ourselves that some of the struggles that we're dealing with now and issues that we're dealing with now have been a long time coming. I mean, the levels of poverty and inequality are just unacceptable. A country which sits at over 40% of unemployment, and predominantly those who are unemployed are young. So all it needs is it's a trigger, and the trigger this time was the arrest of and detention of the former president Jacob Zuma. But quite honestly, this could have been caused by anything. It was the levels of inequality, like I said, have been just so unacceptable. So what's happening now is that, in fact, as we're speaking now, our president is going to one of the hot spots in the country, which is in KwaZulu-Natal. I think he's en route now to go and meet up with the security forces, to meet up with government officials, and to also meet up with South Africans to just say, how did we get here? How can we then get better? And then later, we are hoping to host him here in Johannesburg on Sunday to mark Mandela Day. So we will be with the president hopefully on Sunday, again to mark Madiba's legacy. But importantly, maybe Philippa, before I stop, I think it's important that we say that we didn't do a lot of work of reckoning with the past that is now coming back to haunt us. Issues of race relations, they are now beginning to rear their ugly head again, where you find that some races are now attacking each other. But all it needs was just for there to be a spark, and that spark was caused by what happened recently with the former president.
Absolutely. Thank you, Salo. Stuart, I'll bring you in here.
Yeah, look, I think Salo's excellent reference to history, and I have some idea of what his record is, for people to know their history, to know the inequities of history. I mean, not just with regard to the current violence in South Africa, but I mean, it's just the genocide to indigenous people in Canada, for example, has only just been acknowledged and revealed. And it's not so long ago, and that Australia had to find the courage to admit that it was built on the slaughter of indigenous people. So Salo's absolutely correct to acknowledge the past, to have the kind of courage of a Mandela to say this is what reality is like is crucial to begin to craft even the most modest policy to deal with the cruelty, the inequality that he has just referred to.
Yeah, absolutely, and we can relate also in Australia, I think, Salo, because of we are actually going through a period of reconciliation here at the moment, and that has been 30 years based on South African reconciliation and other processes around the world. And I don't think we're obviously we are not in the same situation, but, you know, I mean, 30 years we've come some way, but we are still dealing with those issues too. And not that we can, you know, necessarily compare, but the process of reconciliation is such a challenge in itself.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we tend to take lightly. In South Africa, I think reckoning work was not done to its fullest. Archbishop Tutu's Truth and Reconciliation Commission started the process. But there's so much that can be done through legislation, I should say, and there's so much that can be done by through a process such as the Truth Commission. But hard work comes in when you then have to do hard work, the work that needs to be carried here in the heart. And I think that's the part we actually haven't done. Madiba said that the in terms of legislating, is that you can legislate so far to get races to begin to see the light of what needs to be done, for cultures even to begin to understand where they come from, for pain to begin to be understood in its depth. But work of forgiveness and reconciliation is more hard work. And I think if we are to then incorporate the heart in that kind of work, we will get somewhere. And today, we see what's happening in South Africa, with particularly in Durban, where you see it, images in South Africa, disturbing images of Indian people attacking black people, African people, and similarly with African people attacking Indian people. You see areas where, also in Durban predominantly, where black people are being stopped from going into particular areas. By virtue of being black, you can't shop in particular areas because you are immediately thought as a looter. So it doesn't matter what your status is in the nation, you are a looter. So I think that kind of hard work of understanding that you are causing deeper pain, and you are actually also opening wounds that we thought we had started to deal with. And I personally, as a young man, when I see how some of the African people now are being treated, one is taken back to growing up in the Northwest province, where you'd be stopped just by virtue of being black, that you are stopped, you can't go in a particular area. I was once hit by the barrel of a gun on the head, passed out for a few seconds, and the person who did that, I was just 14. The person who did that didn't see a child of 14 years. He just saw a black child who could just be done what they did. So I think that kind of woundedness we're still going to deal with for a long time. So that's these are wounds that we still have to reckon with and try heal.
Yep. Thank you, Salo. Yep, Stuart.
Look, Salo, that's great. That's incredibly important. But you could be talking about Afro-Americans. You could be talking about minority groups in London or here, because the issue about the abusive use of power, disproportionately by men, the process over centuries of people needing to establish their identity by discriminating, by developing prejudice towards the other, has gone on for too long. And for me, it's about the fact that so many people, so many politicians, so many governments don't know how to use power in a life-enhancing way. I mean, Mandela's wonderful legacy to us was to teach us that creative non-violence was crucial for mental health, for physical health, let alone for freedom.
Absolutely. So, moving on to that, I mean, obviously, what Nelson Mandela taught us is so important today, and perhaps more so than ever. So, can you maybe talk to the audience about why is this day so important, and perhaps to not just in your country, but for all of us? I mean, I think it's clear, but it'd be great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so the day was inaugurated in 1999 in 2009, I should say, sorry, by Nelson Mandela, and at the time he was looking at how we can, as a people, avoid celebrating him with big events that were most of the time really costly, How do we do that and redirect the effort and energy towards looking after the plight of the poor, the vulnerable, those that Prof. Rees was saying they tend to be abused by power, those who feel forgotten by progress, development. And that's how he then said, the world remains beset by so much human suffering, poverty, inequality. It is in your hands to help build a different world. And that was him signaling that he was handing over the baton of leadership to the next generation. And that generation is here for it to then take it forward and say, in our name, in Madiba's honor, we will now try to build a more equal world. So that's how the day was brought about. It started, interestingly, in 2 cities. I remember this so clearly because I flew to New York for the inaugural event with the mayor in New York, and there was another event here in Johannesburg. And today we're talking about over 150 countries that celebrate the day, because it was then declared by the United Nations as an international day for humanitarian work.
Thank you.
Philip, I'll just chime in quickly in terms of the significance of the day and the significance of what Sello has just said, because in a way, although we started with the illustrations of the distressing events in South Africa, we're seeing massive abuses of power around the globe, compounded by COVID, compounded by the crisis of global warming. But let's be clear that I mean, the Mandela legacy for us right at this very moment is about a couple of issues. One is about speaking truths. We're being encouraged to grow up in an area where truth does not matter. You just make it up. It's a kind of Trump postmodernism. You know, my truth is as good as yours or better than yours. And the second issue on this with the same word, truth, is about speaking truth to power. We can't worship the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and continue to facilitate massive inequalities that, in Sello's words, have been the trigger for the outbreak of violence and despair in South Africa.
So question to both of you probably, but Sello first. So how did Mandela advocate and implement his visions and values, even though he was going through a turbulent, time, and South Africa's in a turbulent time then? Was it just the force of his nature, or?
Sorry, Philippa. I think the thing that distinguished Madiba is him taking what would be ordinary disciplines that you and I could just have, but take it in a way that one would then even add issues of sacrifice, self-sacrifice, make sure that there's greater understanding of how people can live together with differences that they have. There's a little book that we just wrote, and in fact, I was going to show you the cover, which I can do that. Let me just, apologies.
That's great.
Well, you wanted to visual display, Philippa.
Yes, I did. I should.
So you asked for it, Philippa. So here you have.
There we are. Oh, beautiful.
So this little book that we recently authored with a colleague of mine, Vern Harris, and in it it says I know this to be true, and it's about finding the leader in you. And if we are to reflect on Madiba, is to not always wait for the big man to lead, the great leader to lead, because in most instances we are disappointed when they don't live up to our expectations. And I think that's what we then have to reckon with. And if we are to do anything different, is to then say, each one of us, Madiba said that it doesn't matter what station in life you have, you can make a difference. If he was speaking to nurses, saying whether you clean the linen in the hospital or you clean the floors, you change patients and wash them and look after them. Every station in life is about making sure that you do your best to lead in that in whatever capacity you've been given. And I think most of the time we expect leadership to be those who occupy an office, and that's the mistake we make. That's why whenever a young person is seen to be a budding star, they are then told, you must be a politician. And I always say, I don't need to be a politician. You can make a difference by being just a community leader. Yeah. Lead where you are. And I think that's what Madiba then found, that every one of us can aspire to do the same that he did, to find the leader within.
Absolutely.
Yeah, look,
yes.
For me, Madiba's example had to do with a couple of things. One was that he almost followed a kind of Gandhian principle that it's easy to have a conversation with your friends. The real test is engaging with your enemies. And because of his courtesy and his humor and his enormous negotiating skills, he was able to do that. The other quality that we'll no doubt refer to again and again is about courage, mental and physical courage. I often go to our federal parliament and say to politicians, why don't you try a bit of courage? Because it's good for you mentally and physically. You know, take it 2 times a day after meals, and you'll feel better in the evening.
Absolutely. Salo, I reflecting on what you said, Mr. Mandela's values and the way that he saw leadership is very similar to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community here. Obviously, we've learnt lessons from Mr. Mandela, but it is so true. And we often have a saying here, start where you stand, in terms of, you know, going forward. And, you know, we always acknowledge that our leadership is not hierarchical. That is a kind of well-known fact, I suppose, you know, in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and the way that we lead, you know, at a community level. Anyone can be a leader. You know, it is not a position that is, you know, bestowed, I suppose, upon you from upon high. You are a leader in your community. You are a leader in your family. You know, you're a leader at your school. You know, and that is how a lot of I suppose authentic leadership for Aboriginal people comes through, and it's quite often that way. And in fact, we tend to be the opposite. If somebody puts their head up as being a leader without that kind of or community authority, you know, it is not sincere to us.
You know, I like what you said about start where you stand. So if you don't mind, if it's not in any way a registered trademark somewhere, I'd love to use that. To say that that's something to take on, to say, if you were to start where you stand, then it means that hierarchy doesn't matter. And I think that's why Madiba then was so successful. I had the honor of working with him for at least 3 years before he retired fully. And for those 3 years, I remember thinking to myself, there's something so special about how here's someone who could look down on people, yet he didn't. And I want to give you an example of what happened in 2009. So between 2008 and 2010, Madiba would say he wants to go to this place or that place. I think he was closing the loop around his life, so revisiting people that he hadn't seen for too long. So this day he went out to Soweto. And my colleague, I was not there on the day, but my colleague then came back and said, you know, I was blown away by how Madiba got in the car. And people had now gathered, thousands of people had gathered around the car. and they started singing Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela, there's no one like you. So he then gets in the car and he says to my colleague, why are they doing this? So my colleague says, because it's you. You are Nelson Mandela. I mean, they're showing respect. So she says, he then says, after asking this question 3 or 4 times, he then said to her, well, isn't that the mistake, the biggest mistake about us human beings, is that we elevate some so high that we then forget that that can get to their head. And before my colleague could respond, Madiba just lay back on the thing and just started, I think, trying to reflect on what just happened. And I think the elevation that we want, we see that with predominant with politicians, that we love being elevated. We love being taken to be above everybody else. And that's what Madiba is saying. Actually, no. Start where you stand. And once you start where you stand, it means that you are great enough where you are, and somebody else who's next to you, they are great where they stand too.
Yep. Look, I had a similar experience on one occasion with President Mandela. I went to welcome him, and a few years before we'd spent a lot of time. I'd spent a lot of time with Archbishop Tutu, and I said to Mandela, welcome to what we were about to do. We had your assistant here a few years ago, and he said, on the contrary, I was his assistant. In other words, he wasn't about to be put in a top-down position. It was the other way around.
Yeah, beautiful. And those reflections, so true. And not only for South Africa, but Mandela wanted for that idea to be international, and for us to, for that legacy and those ideas to spread, further. So, in promoting those visions of internationalism and independence, how do you think we can continue to do that? Or interdependence.
Thanks, Philippa. Yeah, thanks, Philippa. Madiba believed deeply in the interconnectedness of all struggles for freedom. And he always argued that it was impossible to be fully free when there's someone in some corner in the world who's still in bondage. So one's own freedom places a responsibility on one to fight for the freedom of others. And I think if we are to think like that, we'll then go on to reflect on his experience of international solidarity that he experienced in the anti-apartheid movement, which clearly demonstrated this power. And I think if we are to do that, it also says that it will inform his commitment to peacemaking initiatives around the world. And I think the South African experience and Madiba's experience means that if he was alive today, I have no doubt that he would be arguing that humanity needs to confront poverty and inequality together. He would bemoan. I think he would really be at pains to watch how inequality that comes as a result of immunization, for example, the vaccine, access to vaccine, where the first world prioritized themselves over the third world. And today you find that the first world is now reopening. People are able to just walk freely without much care, because 70% they've been vaccinated. Here in Africa, we're still sitting with, if you're sitting at 30%, you're lucky. And I think that's what we then have to be doing. So humanity needs to confront the challenge of making a laboratory post-COVID reality together. Humanity needs to confront the challenge of climate change and ecological catastrophe together. Because if we don't, we are doomed in terms of those who are still to be born. They will be born into a world that actually is about selfishness. And in fact, it might not even exist, because we would have just destroyed the future that we so need.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fabulous.
I mean, Mandela's points about internationalism are pretty valuable for me, because I've spent a lot of time in the Gaza Strip on the West Bank in that terrible conflict. And of course, one of the things that Mandela always insisted on was that South Africans will never be completely free until the people of Palestine are free. And Sello is absolutely right to remind us of the need for a common humanity, the language of a common humanity. And the reference to the vaccine apartheid is a priority. But how we cannot think of interdependence when we are all threatened by global warming, but we're equally threatened by the resurrection of authoritarianism around the world, as though there is no other way to use power. I mean, we see it even in domestic violence, which is almost as big a pandemic as COVID. It's partly because when you speak to perpetrators, it's almost as though they behave like the Myanmar military. They can't think of any other way apart from being totally abusive. So we'll probably come to the question which I've heard Sello refer to in an interview on South African television, I think it was. It's about a language for humanity, but we'll come to that probably later.
Absolutely. Look, this is a fantastic conversation. It's time for a short break as we view the 2018 IFLC's take on the worldwide chorus Free Nelson Mandela, and we will come back to those important questions.
27 years, stolen from the lifetime of a fellow human being. Mandela was a man whose freedom was snatched away from him because he wanted freedom. He was a hero ready to die, to be able to live freely. Long years of life in a cell, away from his family, loved ones, and the country he loved dearly. And finally, freedom in whose name he paid a heavy price. This freedom meant a lot, not just for Mandela, but for all of humanity. Because he wanted freedom and equality for every human being. Whoever works to serve all of humanity is an example for all of humanity. Mandela struggled not only against oppression, but also against the idea of responding to violence with violence. And he could live without bread, but not without freedom. Mandela lived for freedom and died a free man. No, good people don't die.
Nelson Mandela, oh, I'm begging you, free Nelson Mandela, oh, I'm begging you, free Nelson Mandela, oh, I'm begging you, free Nelson Mandela. 21 years in captivity. His shoes too small, but his feet still fit. His body abused, but his mind is still free. Are you so blind that you cannot see? I say free Nelson Mandela. Oh, I'm begging you, free Nelson Mandela. Oh, I'm begging you, free Nelson Mandela. Oh, I'm begging you. Are you so blind that you cannot see? Are you so deaf that you can't hear his plea? I say, free Nelson Mandela. Oh, I'm begging you, free Nelson Mandela. Oh, I'm begging you, free Nelson Mandela. Oh, I'm begging you, free Nelson Mandela. Oh, I'm begging you. Oh, you got to free. 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 Free.
What did you make of that? Bringing history to life. Part of the Colours of the World concert in the heart of the biggest city in Australia, this island home of ours. This is IFLC Sydney. And if you're using the hashtag, make sure it's in the lowercase, IFLC Sydney. What did you think?
What did I think? I loved it, George, to have a freedom fighter like that to come from 27 years behind bars, largely spent on Robben Island, of course, to become the leader of the nation that he fought for and that he loved so much. What an incredible story of triumph over adversity, and that's why he remains a hero to so many of us, George.
Absolutely.
Oh, wasn't that a powerful performance?
Indeed,
Yeah,
it was beautiful.
Is it too late to be taught how to dance?
Never.
It's never too late. So I think you should just, never too late. So come over here, and I'm sure there will be, by the way, I'll join the same class because my kids think that I'm the worst when it comes to dance.
Absolutely.
I thought it was in your DNA to be able to dance beautifully.
I thought so too, until my kids, they say never listen to your children. I thought I was good until my kids put me in my place.
Yes, my daughter is mortally embarrassed by my moves. I think I can dance. But maybe not in her contemporary sense. Oh, funny.
Yeah.
Look, we might pick up where we left off talking about internationalism. I think was where, you know, and how Nelson Mandela's, you know, vision was that, you know, he would never be free, or we would never be free until, you know, others are free. Can we pick back up on that, Salo?
Yeah, I think there's the need for us to continue to always observe how legacy of freedom is not just about freeing oneself from your own bondage, but is freeing others from struggles that they are faced with on the daily basis. You might know that I climb Kilimanjaro every year, except for the last 2 years I have not. And so I've climbed Kilimanjaro 4 times. This could have been the 5th time this year, but I couldn't because of COVID and other realities. So, in fact, as we speak, there's a group of South Africans who are for the same cause who are climbing Kilimanjaro at the moment, and they will summit on Madiba's birthday on Sunday. Now, why they do that is to free people from the bondage of want, where you raise funds in order to ensure that others can have the most basic of things, such as access to sanitary pads. You know, so for girls to be able to have access to sanitary pads. And I think if we are to begin to build a world that talks about freedom, we shouldn't just be thinking of political freedom. It should be about freeing people from want, freeing people from poverty, from inequality, from the bondage of feeling that They are the discarded, the wretched of the earth. And those are people that we should now be thinking about as the new generation that needs to then be freed. And that's why we then have to do everything possible with the little that you have to free others from poverty and inequality.
I just want to put those observations in a sort of back to the international context issue, because we're all living at a time now when internationalism has been rejected. I mean, "Make America Great Again" was Trump's form of protectionism. The essentially racist vote of the British for Brexit to say we don't want anything to do with the European Union. I mean, the European Union was built with the idea of having peace in the world. That was the foundation initially, and has been completely rejected. Unless there is the dominance of altruism over egoism, there won't be any. It can't be. We'll never deal with the poverty of people in South Africa, or poverty anywhere. We'll simply collude with a process that says that the Myanmar military can do what they like, etc.
Yeah. Now, sorry, Salo, just wondering how young people in South Africa are feeling that they are participating in the process of the nation building. How are they feeling, especially after the Black Lives Matter movement? Has that had any impact over there? Just wondering about young people and youth.
Yeah, it has had an impact here in South Africa, and in fact, at the moment, with the stuff that I mentioned earlier about what's happening in South Africa, it's interesting that Black Matter again, that theme has come back to say you can't continue to treat Black people the way they've been treated and get away with it. So, but for young people in South Africa, the struggle of poverty hits them even more, because the levels of unemployment that I mentioned earlier on, in fact, over 50%, 60%, I think, of those are young people. So if you have a cohort of young people who, unlike Nelson Mandela, and unlike what we saw earlier on in terms of the play that was produced in 2018, where Madiba said what he was prepared to die for. Today, you just struggle to get young people to even just declare what they are willing to live for, because they have nothing to lose. So you're creating a cohort of young people who have nothing to lose. And for as long as we do what Prof said, Prof Reed said, is that you then have a situation where young people feel disaffected. They are disconnected from what their current struggles are, and they are not listened to. And if we are to do that we continue to not listen to young people, we are sowing new seeds of bitterness, new seeds of hopelessness, new seeds of people who of discontent even, but of indifference. That my vote doesn't actually matter, does it? That's the danger that we face with.
We're living, these young people in every country are even ones who don't face massive poverty, have a sense of pessimism about the future, in part because we've lived for the past 30, 40 years under the so-called free market of neoliberal economics that basically says to young people and others, life is a competition. It's not about sharing. It's not about a common humanity. It's not about universal human rights. It's a competition. It's about the accumulation of advantage. And unless we reject, and in some way reject those ideas and those theories and replace them with the sense of fellowship, international fellowship, which incidentally is called socialism. And Mandela, he actually writes a lot about that in those terms. We need to demystify that word because, I'm the beneficiary of that process, a process post-war Europe that said you were entitled to free primary, secondary, and tertiary education. You were entitled to a commitment to full employment and to protected housing. So the issue of the prospects of young people with Philippa, which you correctly bring up, has to be about thinking differently about the distribution of resources, i.e., about economic theory.
Yeah. And I think that idea, coming back, Solo, to what we were talking about before, about start where you stand, communities are so important then for young people, really, because this is where they're coming from. And, starting the work in communities, and starting, a lot of work is being done already in communities, but, I suppose, bringing it back to start where you stand, looking at what you can do in your space is so important, and just reiterating that idea, because it does often seem overwhelming. And I can imagine, for young people, these challenges are completely overwhelming. So how can we help support younger people in giving them, advice and trying and hope? Like, start where you stand came from somebody asking us, how can we help you? How can we help Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? And as somebody said, as simply as that, will start where you stand, start in your own community.
Yeah, Philippa, for me, there's a similar way of thinking about this. One of our lead thinkers here used the phrase, lift as you rise. And I think if we are to think like that, we'll go back to what Prof said, that we shouldn't be competing. Instead, we should be collaborating. And if collaboration comes from lifting. So in South Africa, there's a phrase that Madiba used a lot, Ubuntu, called Ubuntu. My humanity is dependent on you. If I can't just think of myself as being humane without thinking of considering your humaneness. I am because you are. That's what Ubuntu is. The closest English word, even though it doesn't capture it well, is humanity. And I think we've lost our humanity. That common touch that says, with young people, we must always give them a sense that tomorrow will be better than today. And at the moment, we keep on just having development grow away from them. And we don't give them space to be innovative. We want to apply the same old ways of thinking instead of doing what Prof is asking us to do, which is go back to the basics and always think, how can we create a more collaborative world that can then help them thrive?
Yeah. I want to come back to there has to be a different narrative about what the next 50 years holds for that generation.
Yeah.
I mean, my generation said, well, you work hard, you get a job, chances are you'll, you might get a pension, you'll have a roof over your head, and you can acquire a television and even a car, maybe 2 cars. Now, I'm sorry, but that narrative has to be replaced because the world of work is changing. The work as we know it will have to be redefined. So for me, the issue internationally is about income. It's not about work. It's about a guaranteed income, and with a choice of work. And I just want to avoid too many, giving my own sort of cliche, but I'm a great believer in everyone having small victories. You have to have a small victory by a Friday evening in order to make it feel worthwhile to get up on Monday morning. And I don't want to talk only about that, because the small victories have to be set against this more ambitious goal of having a totally different narrative, different set of values, different set of policies, and international collaboration to achieve them.
Absolutely. I think we're going to bring John. I think we're going to bring John Cleary in here, one of our board members, who would also like to give us join the conversation. And we might just, while we're getting John here, let's think about what did sustain Mandela through his long imprisonment and caused him to never give up hope.
You used the word that I was hoping that at some point we'll use, hope, because one of our bishops here calls Madiba the ancestor of hope, because he lived by hoping that tomorrow will be better. And I think what sustained him in prison for that long, and also while he was president, in fact, even post-presidency, is the belief that human beings can be better, that human beings always aspire to be better and want to then do right in terms of making sure that we grow together, that development doesn't leave some behind. And I think I can imagine sitting in a prison cell, and you receive a note saying your son has just died, and you can't go and bury him. You apply to go bury him, it's rejected. You then stay for a week, and you're trying to mourn the death of your son. What keeps you alive at that point is to always try and make sure that you are connected to that family that you can't sustain. You can't bury your own son because the resources are not available. You can't even go and see that it's done. So you don't even have access to a phone to call someone and say, please make sure that my son is buried with dignity. So to be able to survive that kind of pain, you can only do so if you have faith and hope that something greater is coming. He rejected being released on more than one occasion, where there were conditions to his release. He said, well, you either release me fully or you don't, but I'm not here to negotiate about my release. So why would you want to continue to stay through that pain? And I think it's because he knew that what was coming was greater than what he had at the time.
Thank you, Stella. Stuart, I'll just bring John in here, if you don't mind, and then we'll come to you for a reply to that too.
Sure, no worries.
Well, it's a great honour to be. Hi, Philippa, Stuart, and Tilla. It's great to be part of this conversation. My job in a few moments is just going to be to round things up and offer a few words of thanks. So perhaps, Stuart, we could hear what your observation from Silla, because I was so engaged in that conversation. Philippa, thank you very much. That Stuart, you might offer us a few those few words to sort of wind things up.
Are you referring to me? I'm sorry.
Yes, what you were about to say. Yeah.
What I wanted to say, following Sello's point about how Mandela survived imprisonment, his experience was that he didn't do everything by himself. I've never achieved anything by myself. I've always pinched ideas from other people and then, polished them a bit. Because when you read his story, I mean, Winnie Mandela was highly significant. So was Walter Sisulu. So was Oliver Tambo in exile. And none of us do anything by ourselves. The joy is being together. I mean, nowadays we have to do it by Zoom, but usually, I mean, one of the reasons for going to work is the chemistry of being with colleagues, and generate and getting support and humor and ideas from them. But that contrasts totally with the psychology and the ideology of individualism that derives from those free market economic policies, when in fact it's the solidarity and the enjoyment and the support of one another that leads to overcoming what Mandela faced.
Stuart, thank you so much for that. Philippa, I've been asked to say a few words of thanks to you all tonight. Thank you so much for guiding this conversation through and bringing your own experience into it. We've also got to thank the Affinity Foundation, along with the Nelson Mandela Foundation and the Sydney Peace Institute, for their work in promoting better community relations, and particularly an unmentioned group thus far, the Turquoise Harmony Institute, in assisting to host Cello. The Turquoise Harmony Institute aims to use the tradition that Cello referred to, Ubuntu, to serve the people of South Africa and the world in promoting common humanity. So thanks, Cello, and thank you, Stuart Reeves, for this intercontinental conversation, and especially to Philippa for facilitating this webinar. Now, in closing, can I just share a one personal anecdote? In 1990, in the months following Mandela's release from prison, I, along with several other journalists from the ABC Radio National, was invited to South Africa to provide some coverage of the unfolding events. One of my contacts invited me to what was to be an evening dinner of the first meeting of the Association of Black Lawyers since the release of Mandela, and he was to be the guest speaker. Now, have any of you seen the movie Invictus? Because whilst that was a fictional sporting conference, it was at the Black Lawyers Association meeting that I saw one of the scenes of Invictus for real. I was there. Mandela had just flown in from a meeting with the frontline state leaders in Zambia, and he arrived late, and we'd arrived early and found ourselves seated up the front in the midst of the diplomatic corps, including the United States ambassador. And this was at a time when the US government had yet to make up its mind about Mandela. Was he a communist or was he one of us? Eventually, Mandela arrived, walked into the room, shaking hands with the table waiters and the serving staff, and as he drew near to us, he pointedly avoided shaking hands with the diplomats. Then when he rose to speak, he addressed the leaders of the rival nationalist groups in the room, and he went calmly through the litany of claim and counterclaim that rival groups were making to be the leading nationalist voice over the ANC, and outlined the broader challenge they were all facing. Then he stopped. He put his hands down at his side, looked down along the room and said, "Now I will wait here for those of you, my brothers, who wish to join me in facing these challenges together." And the whole room went silent. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. Here was Mandela standing quietly and with great dignity, putting his leadership absolutely on the line in front of the diplomatic corps and the world's media. It literally disarmed himself before everyone. And after an agonizing minute or so, there was some shuffling, and a voice from the far end of the room said, "I will come and stand with my comrade Nelson Mandela." And it was the leader of one of those groups who up until then had been claiming rivalry with Mandela, and within seconds others began to move, and soon there was a crowd with Mandela at the podium and a chorus of joy and singing around the room. It's one of the most singular experiences of my life. That experience in South Africa, I think, was a stunning example of how access to the deeper currents of a culture can put you in touch with the key drivers of its politics. And in my life, I've had the privilege of meeting another distinguished advocate for peace, and that was thanks to Affinity, when I had the opportunity to meet with Fethullah Gulen. And Gulen said something that, Cello, you mentioned earlier: man always lives with hope. He is the child of hope. So as the world takes us forward to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and strives to overcome new sources of adversity, let's carry the message of hope and recall the lessons of Nelson Mandela's life and the essential humanism that guided him. Philippa, Stuart Rees, Cello, thanks for joining us, and remember Mandela's words: for to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Thank you all, and good night.
You free, Nelson Mandela.